Dream a little dream of me.
Welcome kindreds, it's Jessica the Story Witch, and this is going to be a video about the word of the year concept. I've made a couple of videos about this in the past and a blog post which I will link down below if you are looking for extra information. I wanted to just reflect on the process of word of the year. I'm going to talk about like what it is, why you might want to do it, and what sort of things, where it can take you, I suppose. And I've also got an idea that I wanted to share with you and ask whether you think this might be useful. So stay tuned for that. So word of the year. Now this is something that I heard about quite a long time ago now, and I can't remember the very first place I heard about it, but I'm pretty sure in my blog post I have linked everybody who does that. Somebody who influences me quite a lot with this practice is somebody called Susanna Conway. And I'm pretty sure I've linked her in the blog post, but if not, you can find her on Instagram, and also she has a newsletter which she sends out where she talks about word of the year and that as well. But there are multiple people now talking about word of the year. It is not like it's an idea of one specific person. It is something that has obviously grown bigger than that and is now a practice which is embraced by lots of people. So the idea of the practice is that going into a year, and like some people do it from birthday to birthday, some people do it from calendar year, you can do it however you want to do it. There's no rules. I'm just going to share about the kind of things I do and that I've seen other people do that have been effective. So you find your word, and the other video that I did called finding your, I think it was called like finding your word of the year or finding your magic word for the year, something like that. So in that video I talked more about the process of finding your word. So I'm not going to go too much into the finding process here. I want to talk more about like what you actually do with it once you've got it, how you work with it, how it changes you, that kind of thing. And I'm hoping this is not going to be too long either, so feel free to follow up those other resources if you are interested in that. But you find your word by some means. Like lots of people will already have their words ready if it's a practice they're familiar with, but if you're new to it, then there's still plenty of time. There's not a deadline for it, but you will find your word, and you will know it is your word because it will thrill you a little bit, scare you a little bit, make you feel a bit like you don't want to do it, and also sometimes it can also be like, that sounds like too much work. So you'll have complex feelings about your word, but if you wrote it down, and this is something you can do, like if you write your word down and then write down a few other words that you're thinking about. A pendulum is really good to use with this. You can just use like anything that you can dangle over it and just hold it over each word, and the right word the pendulum will let you know by doing something different over that word than the other word, so you can check it out. The choice of the word is obviously important. The word is important. Words are important. And the neons, I thought my word for 2020 was going to be indigenous, but as it turned out, it is native, which that might be like, well, they're synonyms, that's kind of the same word, but it's not exactly the same. So finding the exact right word is really helpful, and the closer you are to it, the better. And also specific, like I see a lot of people on on Facebook groups and stuff like that say, oh, like my word is going to be love, or my word is going to be strength, or very huge concepts. And I think sometimes like when it's that big, it can be too much and not right. That's not to say that sometimes those words aren't right. They can be right, but if you're kind of hedging your bets by having a big word like that, or if it's because that's what you want, sometimes it's because that's what you want. Somebody will choose something like peace because that is what they want, but you don't really choose your word, it kind of chooses you. So yeah, sorry. Also, if it is a word that works as like a verb and a noun, that can be really useful to it just gives more layers to the word. Obviously, oh yeah, and so native does work like that actually, which is interesting. The first thing I do when I've got my word then is to do like a kind of mind map of it, everything that I associate with that word, my definition that I already have of that word, and that kind of everything that's associated with it. And then I look up definitions, and like you can do this on the internet really easily now, and you can get as lots of different definitions. And also it can be cool to like see, you know, like often in the definitions they'll give you some sentences about how people use it, and then that can start you off on a little path as well of like things that it's associated with. Like it's been really interesting for me at the end of this year now, while it's still 2019, I'm working with sovereign as my word for the year, sovereignty. And 3 different people have recommended to me that I watch The Crown on Netflix, and I'm kind of resisting that, but it's like, it seems so obvious, doesn't it, that I obviously should watch that. It like blatantly ties in with my word of the year in title alone. So things like that will come up that will feed into your word that you didn't necessarily know were part of your word beforehand. And that, I find that so fascinating, so interesting. Like quite often, one of my word for 2018, I think it was emerge. And I had not heard about emergence, which is like the kind of phenomena of the whole always echoing I'm not going to explain it very well, but basically there will be things associated with your word that you don't know. If you already know everything about your word, then you obviously don't really need to live that word for a year. And like some people say like, oh, I chose a word for the year, but then like I forgot what it was, and I haven't really connected with it. And if that happens, is because there's not anything wrong with you, it just is that wasn't the right word. So it's well worth digging into the finding process and the clicking process, the kind of puzzle pieces process. And I really like to have it in my journal, because then I can keep adding stuff. It's like, oh yeah, like things like I say, like watching The Crown, or I have a sovereign coin which my grandparents gifted me when I was a child, and when I turned 18, and that I've been using that a lot this year, you know, things like that, things that are kind of connected but you don't think the connections are not obvious straight away. So as for how you work with your word through the year, I find it's good to have like a specific point in time where you will keep coming back to it. So like you might say, okay, every new moon I will have another mind map on my word and notice if what I'm doing is kind of in alignment with my word, or if I have anything to add to my original mind map of my word. And like some people like to have their word as a physical reminder somewhere around them, or they might have a goddess that, or you know, anything like that, any kind of deity or plant or something that represents their word to them, as like, or you can even make like an altar of your word and have things on there that are connected with that and the work that you're doing with that. And it's hard to explain, because it's the kind of process that until you have done it yourself, you don't necessarily see the full value and the full worth of it. So I would encourage you to try it and see what you think. And by the end of the year, I always find that my perspective has changed, which I see that as a good thing. You know, like I said, if you already know everything about your word, then it's not going to take you anywhere. There's no journey with the word then, is there? There's no point to it. And I said I was going to ponder whether this would be something useful. What I'm thinking is, perhaps, I know a lot of people ask for more guidance on finding the word in the first place, and that is the hardest bit, because once you've got the word, you can't escape it. So that is definitely the hardest bit. So what I'm thinking is that perhaps I will do a live, I'm not sure when, because my husband is away for a couple of weeks now. So it will be some point in December, maybe even, if this is not completely crazy, to do it in between like Christmas and New Year, where it's like kind of like a weird liminal time. And that is also, we're also from an astrological point of view in a good time for like bringing things through the portal at that point, because we're in between eclipses. So what I'm thinking is I might do a live word of the year session where perhaps we can like talk about, people can ask me questions if you want to, or we can just kind of chat in the chat about word of the year. And then also I could draw some cards, so like if people wanted guidance, I could like pull a card and then perhaps just like spill out some words that are connected with that card from my point of view, which might be a good starting place for you to go for your word of the year. It might be that you don't feel like you need this, so let me know in the comments whether you think this would be something useful or not, and I'll try and look for a time. It'll probably be like a weekend day, and I'll try and put it at a good time. If you know, if people want this, I'll try and find it at a good time that will suit the majority of people, so like either in the morning or the evening for me, because I know from a down under point of view that works better. Although I think evening is better because otherwise Americans are all asleep. So yeah, let me know if that is useful, or you know, or would be useful potentially. And good luck with finding your word of the year. If you already know what it is and you've started working with it, then you know, please do share down below. I love nosing at other people's words of the year. Thank you so much for watching. Warmest blessings. I will see you very soon.